Hi, welcome everyone. We're so happy that you're here with us today. I'm Kelly Henry. I lead SoGal Foundation. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, SoGal Foundation is a nonprofit on a mission to close the gender and diversity gap in entrepreneurship and investing. We have 50 chapters across 5 continents around the world where we host hyper-local events and educational programming that thoughtfully and measurably impacts the diversity gap both on the local level and then connects all of these local communities and ecosystems for a truly global network of diverse founders and funders. We're really excited to have you all here with us today and to work with our partners StartOut. Alex, I'll let you intro.
Thanks, Kelly. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Tanner. I'm a programming board member for the New York chapter of StartOut. So what is StartOut? It's a nonprofit focused on increasing the number, the diversity, and the impact of LGBTQ entrepreneurs. And we work with our community to foster business success and personal empowerment and a shared purpose to give back and inspire the next generation of LGBTQ entrepreneurs. With that, I will hand it over to our moderator extraordinaire, Willa Bennett.
Hi everyone. First off, thank you to SoGal and StartOut for having us. We're all so excited to be here, and I think it'll be a really interesting discussion. I'm Willa. I oversee GQ's social strategy, and just so excited to get into our panelists. So I'm going to start by going around having our panelists just introduce themselves, tell them a little bit about each of them, what they're working on, and what they're passionate about. Meg, would you like to go first? And feel free to pass it when you're done.
Sure. I'm excited about plugging my computer, which I've just done. My name is Meg He. I am the co-founder and co-CEO of A-Day. We are a technical apparel brand for women, and we are creating a very versatile wardrobe, which is made with very high sustainable and ethical standards, and we really want to lift and transform the mission for fashion. I started off my career in investment banking at Goldman Sachs. I then moved to California from London, where I went to business school. I spent some time working e-commerce there at Everlane, also at Poshmark, and I also did some time in venture capital at Cowboy Ventures in California, and also at Atomica in London. And I am very interested still in how I can help mentor young entrepreneurs, but also on a personal level, I do a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Oh, should I nominate someone else?
Yeah, pass it to someone.
Okay, I will go to that side to Ariel.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Ari. I am co-founder and chief content and community officer at ARFA. We're a personal care company in the D2C space. We create brands and products with people like you and me around the country, for which they are the faces of the brands and profit throughout a profit share program in the country. We believe if you're going to put something onto your body every day, you should benefit as a stakeholder and get to be a meaningful part of the process. Before that, I was at Vice Media for almost 6 years, where I ran all of our women and identity content. And so I separately have a short film that recently came out on Netflix that surrounds child marriage in Pakistan, which is called Sitara. And I'm always interested in creating stories and getting to the bottom of underrepresented people, not just in the US, but around the world. And so I'm excited to be in conversation today. And I nominate Rachel.
I knew that was coming. Hi, I'm Rachel Tipograph. I'm the founder and CEO of Micmac. Micmac is a software company. We help brands where the majority of their sales come from places like Amazon, Target, Walmart, grow their e-commerce businesses. And before that, I ran global digital and social media at Gap and decided to quit my job to build Micmac. Excited to be here. I'm gonna pass it to, is there no one to pass it to? Is that it? I can't see my grid. Stephanie.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Stephanie Lampkin, the founder and CEO of Blendor. We're an enterprise SaaS company. We build augmented intelligence and people analytics software to mitigate unconscious bias, enabling companies to hire and retain a diverse workforce. Started the company about 5 years after my own personal experience, just trying to find work in the tech industry after earning a Stanford and MIT degree, but still being told that I wasn't technical enough for pretty entry-level roles. And just coming to understand the impact of unconscious bias in the way that we manage people. And we're actually soon to announce a new product focused specifically on senior Black professionals who we know are disproportionately negatively impacted by COVID-19. So yeah, excited to be here.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Yeah, really, really important work. Yeah, thank you all for introducing yourselves. I think this will be a really, really amazing conversation. I want to kind of piggyback off of what you brought up. I want to start with COVID. And I kind of want to talk about how each of your companies have pivoted, or maybe some things that like haven't gone as well. And especially like thinking about each of you like as a leader, like how you lead a team in a time of so much change. Yeah, Stephanie, maybe you're the best person to go first, because I feel like
Sure.
you brought up COVID and it seems like a natural place to start, but I'd love to hear about, like, especially as a leader, what you kind of learned about yourself and your team.
Absolutely. So I think the biggest thing I learned is just the importance of agility. And fortunately, we were already in a transition towards pivot right around the time COVID hit, so it wasn't as challenging. But I've just always been a firm believer of transparency. So I immediately emailed all of our investors, board members, and staff just to talk about what we knew and what we did not know. And we took a pretty hard hit because hiring freezes and layoffs were happening across the board. But then George Floyd happened. And all of a sudden, a lot of white people became super woke. And now my email inbox is being flooded. So it's been an interesting sort of roller coaster for us, and going from one area where I had to lay off half of my staff, and it was really challenging to continue to justify the business case for diversity in the midst of a lot of cutbacks. But then immediate opposite, where now I have to rehire and ramp up in response to a lot of companies realizing that they need more diversity in leadership.
Wow, thank you. Has Meg or maybe Rachel, have either of you had similar or different experiences? Something that maybe is going on for you guys?
Yeah, so we're e-commerce software, and when I started the company, the first brands to sign up were beauty brands, and a lot within the luxury space. Fast forward to a week of March 10th, my entire client makeup has changed to grocery and liquor brands. If you think about just your own e-commerce behaviors over the last 12 weeks, you're probably buying a lot less luxury and beauty products and a whole lot more online grocery and online booze. So in order to respond to the market from a go-to-market standpoint, that was a big shift. The other big shift, and I feel incredibly lucky to be able to work in an industry that is growing when so many aren't right now, is that I have hired 30 new people in the last 12 weeks. And these are people who've never stepped foot into our office. These are people that I've never physically met. And to manage that from a cultural standpoint, there's no playbook for it. And so that's been a really interesting experience. And I have no idea if we're doing a good or bad job. I guess we'll find out. So those have been some, interesting moments over the last few weeks.
So for us, we had 2 retail locations in New York and San Francisco. They were shut down, and San Francisco one we actually ended up closing. I think we're very lucky to be able to. We were just, fortunately to be in a really strong position. We had closed a Series A of almost $9 million in November. So we were like well funded, but it was just still like February was our best ever month, and Q2, Q3, Q4 is really where our strongest months are. So to go from like February into a much more challenging environment was definitely like very scary, especially since one of the biggest use cases that people wear our clothing in is travel. And so a lot of that messaging had to be rechanged. I think one of the strongest things that really came out of it was that our team was really geared for distributed working. We've always had the policy that you can work from anywhere that you want, as long as it's the best environment for you. And so, it turned out that everyone really adapted to that incredibly well. But the personal thing is that, especially in the last couple of weeks, due to COVID, both my parents and I have received some level of harassment of xenophobia, and I'm very grateful for what's happened with protests, because now we're able to have a much more woke conversation about it all. Whereas before I felt a little bit like I didn't quite know how to kind of speak about it, and it wasn't like I could clearly mark at one instant, but there had been like a lot of half instants where in the street, like someone might say something, hard to necessarily pinpoint, and there was definitely a couple of instances, and so that was personally like something that was a little bit frightening out of the coronavirus.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think I think that's a really interesting conversation just in general about diversity in the workplace right now and even before with COVID. I'm curious with you, Ariel, like since you're more in the self-care space, like do you notice the conversations like drastically changing, or like do you think your audience is even more reliant on all the amazing work you guys are doing because everything is so changing so quickly? I'm curious from your experience to hear.
Well, I mean, we have people in our what we call our collective, which is folks who are literally age 16 to 65 around the country who have helped build our brands. And what we saw during COVID was that a lot of them were furloughed or laid off, or they were first responders, or they had family members who were affected by COVID, or really over the last few weeks are seeing the country respond to systemic racism that they've experienced in some form of a microaggression or an aggression their whole lives. And so for us as an organization, it's how do we show up and make sure that our team continues to feel safe and open in the organization, and then the same for our collective. And I think, because we are focused in the personal care space, which could previously have been seen as only a utility, so much of COVID was taking things that were a utility and having them not just be a need, but a want. And so there was this desire to be having a conversation around mental health, body awareness, and how to cope when you might not feel safe in a public space. How do you deal with things around anxiety? How do you deal with global trauma? And then so much more on top of that. And so for us, it was really about creating and enhancing our digital opportunities and our meetups, similar to this sort of Zoom call like this, to allow people to have those conversations and just keep iterating. So we work with a lot of experts, a lot of therapists already in the space for the content that we create. And so we just are continuing to respond and mitigate. But certainly as a business, I think, for individuals who thought, will folks want to buy personal care products online who might not have done it before? I think COVID only accelerated that business mechanism, because something that might have been 4 or 5 years down the pipeline really got accelerated because of the fact that retail is much less of an option from a safety and accessibility perspective. So it's definitely been really fascinating on many levels, and we just want to stay as open as possible.
Yeah, that's really amazing to hear that you have so many like different, you're getting like real feedback in real time. That sounds so valuable from a business perspective, but also just must be so interesting to watch right now. I can only imagine all of the conversations you're having with your staff and beyond. I'm curious, and this is kind of an open question to any four of you, but I think you guys have spoken a lot about what it's like to be a leader, but like from the actual, like how has your actual business changed? I feel like I'm getting some questions about that, and I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts besides, of course, the Zooming and the like increase in a need for e-commerce. Like I know from my social media habits, like already e-commerce is like popping up everywhere, but like from an actual business perspective, like how has your actual businesses changed?
Yeah, I mean, from a go-to-market standpoint, it's recognizing what will resonate in markets. You're not tone deaf. So for example, to my sales team, I'm like, literally don't reach out to anyone in beauty. because you could see what happened in China. They're not going to be able to respond to that right now in the US. From a how you operate standpoint, I think, there's a cartoon that's been going around. There's always been this term digital transformation. You would hire executives who would have that title. The reality is COVID is what's transformed corporate America and companies at large and what it means to work virtually. As a business owner, it's been interesting to see the dynamic between maybe people who are parents versus employees who are not. And you have to have a lot of empathy right now for parents as an employer because they're homeschooling, co-parenting, and it's just pure chaos. So from that standpoint, and then from an employee standpoint, you just never know where someone is anymore. And I don't mean by geography, just like what's going on in their head. And I would say mental health and diversity and inclusion have become topics that are a part of every cross-functional meeting, even if the meeting isn't about it. And so how employers address that, what's your role in your employees' mental health, what can and can't you do? I would say those are things that have evolved over the last 12 weeks.
Wow, yes. You're getting some comments being like, wow, so true, amazing. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah, I think that every company across the board is kind of re-examining top down how they are, being diverse or where their blind spots are. And I'm curious if anyone has heard of any company doing something successful, or if anything, like even as leaders, you guys feel that is actually being productive and sparking important and productive conversations.
I mean, things that we started to do, I'll just kick it off. I noticed that no one was taking vacation. It's hard to take a vacation right now. Like, where are you going to go? All those things. But the reality is, like, people are burnt out emotionally. Like, there's just so much happening in the world. So a few things that we started to do was, one, we created this thing called personal block. You can take up to 3 hours every single day. Just block it off in your calendar. Like, essentially, as long as you're hitting results, it's no question asked. The second is we actually institutionalized Summer Fridays. So I'd never done that before. And the way that we structured it seems to be working. We split the company into Team A, Team B to ensure that there's always coverage. So like this Friday, Team B has off. Next Friday, Team A will have off to essentially force people to take off. And then the third is, we are constantly doing employee engagement surveys. And what became clear is one of the reasons why people were not taking vacation was because their managers weren't taking vacation. So we essentially called a management meeting and we said, everyone has to put vacation on the calendar. Like, we have to lead by example. So like, those are just some of the proactive things. They might seem small, but they seem to have an impact on the overall employee base.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's it's top down, and that I feel like every single study that comes out, everything I read is just like always top down. I'm curious for any other panelists, are your companies doing similar things, different things, anything that like is truly sparking productive conversations about mental health or diversity, or just like better communication? Because I feel like even like Zooming is just not the same with your manager. And like, if there's anything that you guys are finding that you'd like to share.
I mean, we at ARFA have always started every team check-in with everyone going around and saying how their body feels and how their mind is. And we have a color scale, and you don't have to explain why, but the point is everybody should have a transparent understanding of how you're doing today. And so that way you feel more comfortable bringing your full self each week, and it's a way to check in. And so we've continued to do that. We actually removed the body one for now, just because right now people's bodies, it's so much more of a sensitive conversation. I think in addition to that, we're reassessing how do we make sure that we're facilitating something outside of Zoom Drain. We have people like do fun facts about each other. We're doing virtual one-on-one coffees. I think honestly figuring out ways to get off the phone and get off the computer are really important. And to Rachel's point, actually like forcing people almost to take vacation. But for us, someone had said to me, and I think it's quite accurate, they optimize their workforce now for 70% like production. Like, how much can you actually get out of a person? Are they going to be 100% right now? No. So we're thinking 70%, and we're thinking that way too. Like, how is a startup business where we have incredibly big goals, how do we meet those in a time during COVID when the world has just completely changed? And with, you know, the recognition of all the protests recently as well. So we don't want people to have to play pretend, and we know that we're going to get the best out of our employees when they can be honest. So we also told them, like, if you need to take today off or 3 hours off to go to a protest, you should do that. Just let your manager know. Or maybe your manager is nearby and they want to go with you. And so we're having a lot of conversations like that. And I think it's also an important moment. I think, like, I would be curious, you know, Stephanie, for your thoughts on this, but as a manager, it's also it's your job to be in uncomfortable conversations sometimes if issues going on around race are impacting the way that you're thinking or reassessing. It's not your employee's job to carry that weight. So you also have to assess, as a leader in your organization, what are the steps you can take to make sure that you're implementing more training, more diversity initiatives, and more space for your employees, either through research groups or other functions, to be able to share how they're feeling, personally and professionally.
Yeah, I'm curious, Stephanie, if you have any thoughts on that. And thank you for sharing that. I think definitely something that I'm seeing pop up a lot on social media. And yeah, just a really important thing to be thinking about as a leader, and especially as you a lot of times like have to speak on behalf of your brand. So yeah, Stephanie, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so this is hit home pretty tough for us. The majority of our software engineers are Black men. And so I've seen firsthand the toll that it takes and the impact. And I just try to lead with vulnerability. And instead of, you know, making attempts to skirt around what's happening, address it head on in a very human way, and also discuss how it's impacting us and our business, and just give people, it kind of like opens up the floodgates for people to just be really vulnerable and trusting about how they are processing what's happening right now. This something similar. One of my investors did kind of like a Wind Down Wednesday event where she invited all the founders in her portfolio on a Zoom call just to kind of talk about the way things are landing for them, and share how they're coping. It was I received a question anonymously about someone asking about how I've been taking care of myself. I actually built a pergola. One, because I was staying with my parents the first couple months of COVID, and I needed to get out of the house. They were just way too loud and boisterous. So I had this idea to build an outside office, but it actually turned out to be very therapeutic. So we're trying to like create an environment where people can share what's working for them, how they're feeling, particularly because of the demographics of our workforce. I've made an extra effort to create that platform.
That's really amazing. Thank you for sharing. Meg, is there anything in that light that you would like to add, or anything that you're experiencing right now?
Yeah, just that I think that, you know, all of this kind of digital first like communication that we have, a lot about it, when it's done well, it really replicates a lot of that, you know, in-person communication well. And I think through our leadership, my co-founder and I, it's really about leading by being vulnerable and by how we're experiencing things, right? It's like me as a queer, like Asian, and she's very white. And I think she has had to go through a lot of discomfort in this. She really had no way of, like, didn't know how, and that actually caused a lot of pain for her. And we just shared a lot of this with our employees, because one of the things that, you know, we do have a majority white in organization, and we only have one Black employee, and we were very worried that she was going to become the underrepresented minority and have to burden with a lot of everyone's questions. So we wanted to kind of put in boundaries there, but also acknowledge that everyone has their own experiences and their own sort of feelings. As an organization, we've always had unlimited, you know, vacations, and you work from wherever you want, but it was really a lot of those in-person kind of moments that were missing. So we encourage people to kind of share more about the everyday that, you know, is missing for people. So if people went to visit, there was this one moment where an employee went to visit her grandmother and was waving to her grandmother from the other outside the window, and she shared that with the team on Slack, and that was a really beautiful moment. Or when, even if you're just taking your dog to go outside to, go and walk around the block, people would say, hey, I'm actually doing that, I'm taking your dog, because those would be moments that usually people could interact with you in. And I think it's just, realizing that everyone's a person having a very human experience, rather than just, the name that you're interacting with and trying to get the work done.
Yeah, I love what you said. Everyone's a person. That's so real, especially when you manage people and have to lead teams and have to, see something in the news and stand up the next day in front of a large Zoom and pretend to make sense of things that you might not even have the answers to. So yeah, thank you for saying that. I guess a question that I feel like I've been seeing a lot pop up is just like, how do you obviously like have one way that you speak about things and communicate with your team and run things, but then when it comes to investors, you kind of have to tell a different story about your company. And I guess like, how do you navigate that, and how do you navigate investors that might have different definitions of diversity, or value your company in a different way that you do? How do you toe that line? And for people watching who maybe are wondering and want to, go in the footsteps, follow one of your guys' footsteps, like what advice do you have about those types of conversations?
I'll chime in. Be honest and get ahead of it. Like, no investor wants to be surprised, and we all have access to the same data points. So your investor is probably very aware if you're operating within an industry that is going to be negatively impacted by COVID, like the event business, for example. I'd say from an investor standpoint, what they probably want you to see, what they want to see is, how can you operate efficiently during this time? Meaning, what can you cut from your operating expenses that are going to allow you to try to stand the test of time? And they probably want to be a part of some of those decisions. Like, you want to give everyone the opportunity to make it feel like it was a little bit of their idea when you're selling something in. So from our timeline, week of March 9th is when things really started to pick up in the US. March 10th is when we decided that everyone was going to work remotely at McMac. And week of March 15th, I sent an email to all of my investors once I had worked with my head of finance on sort of the immediate action that we were taking. And then I would say for the first 6 weeks, like every other week, I was sending an update until it felt like everyone was in the loop. They understood the direction that we were heading. So my stance has always been, get ahead of it and over communicate to your investors so they're never surprised.
So communicate. I've definitely I love that about your company. I feel like even just like from social, like I always know like what the priorities are, where you guys are headed, and it's very clear.
Oh my God, what are we sharing on social?
I love it. I love it. No, and I feel like, just that is very clear. So I appreciate that. Yeah. Is anyone else have anything to share on terms of like, investors? I feel like also a lot of people watching are wondering kind of about your specific paths. So anything to share in that light would be appreciated.
I think ultimately, like finding a great investor is like finding any other relationship. Someone told me that the average length of the relationship between a founder and their investor is like longer than most marriages. So, it has to kind of fit well, right? And it's like any organization, you can pretend for a while that like this really fits and like, do all the things that they want you to do, but ultimately it doesn't feel right, and then it won't feel natural. And this has to kind of last longer than beyond the fundraising round. They're still going to, interact with you. You'll have board meetings. You'll still have to kind of talk to them. And it's as much of a process for you as it is for them. And if you care about different things, then you'll probably continue to care about different things. And the direction that they'll want you to kind of steer your company is not going to be your true north. So I think that given that, you're giving your entirety of who you are into this, to this beautiful kind of baby company that you're building, you should find someone who's also on board with the same journey. And if they're not, then, there's actually hundreds and thousands of, well, maybe not hundreds of thousands, definitely thousands of investors out there. And I think often, people might look at some sort of venture capital list and their competitors list, be like, oh my God, I have to be funded by, these 3 companies. And the truth is, like, you don't have to be funded by those companies. There's really so many options out there. And, beyond venture capital, there's also like, debt and like all sorts of like other cool instruments. And you can actually even get a bank loan that's actually really cheap. But I think that often people feel very homogenized into thinking I have to take money from specific sets of people that they may or may not agree with.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that. Ariel, yeah, I'm curious from your point of view, if there's anything interesting or that you'd like to add.
I mean, for us, we went out and invested on the idea that unlike most businesses that are creating brands, it wasn't a founder-led story. So, myself or my co-founders didn't walk into Dwayne Reed and say, this toothpaste isn't working for me. I must make a better one. It was the idea that people were going to give us money to go talk to other folks around the country. And then based on those similarities and commonalities, we would develop brands that spoke best to them. And so the investors we found had to take a leap of faith with us. I think, our first brand is called Hickey, and it's an everyday sweat brand for any body. It's genderless. So I definitely spoke more about boob sweat in a fundraising meeting than probably most can say they have. But, we believe that we're leading the direct-to-consumer space into the next iteration, which is about conscious capitalism and giving people a seat at the table. And if an investor isn't there for that piece of the puzzle, then they're probably not there for innovation in the way that we need. So I would agree fully with Rachel and Meg. It's about communication, transparency, but also trust. And I think being really clear at the beginning about what you need, because if you're a founder and you're raising, you need to have conviction from start to finish. There are a million people that are going to question what you believe in. And so if an investor at the beginning is sort of questioning where you're coming from, but they're willing to put a check on the table, I would almost consider saying no to that and waiting to find someone that fully believes in where you're coming from. Because otherwise, it's very easy for an idea not to get off the ground. And it's not because that idea isn't good, it's because someone is like putting weight on your chest. So I think it's really important to assess that as you make those choices. You always have more choices than you think you do.
Absolutely. I feel like that kind of leads us to our next question. I'd love, Stephanie, for you to start us off with this one. Yeah, it's obviously Pride, like this, there's obviously this theme, we're all here because we're queer. I was wondering like how your queerness kind of affects your leadership, as a founder, as your relationship with investors, like you are navigating so many different things and now it's all over Zoom. I want to know about like how your queerness has made you a better leader, or something you want more people to know about that space.
Yeah, so it was actually a Lesbian to Tech, the first conference where I participated in a pitch competition and won, and really just expanded my network in the LGBTQ community. And I think for me, for the most part, it's been beneficial. It's just a broader network, greater opportunities, because I sit at the intersection of 3 different marginalized groups. It's hard for me to sometimes disentangle how my race versus gender versus queerness can impact the outcome of something. But I will say that for the most part, the people that I've been able to connect with in the community have done more to open doors than anything else. It's been really great, I think, to have this sort of bond among people in the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, I agree. I think the community is so important. Yeah, Rachel, I feel like you always have strong lesbians around you. Is there, yeah, we were talking earlier about like how you're just like so easy to talk to and do so much for this community. I'm curious like how that's kind of influenced where you are today.
It's because Ari's my bodyguard.
That's true.
Yeah, I came out later in life, which is always weird for people to hear because I'm just so gay. But once I came out, I just decided that that's going to be a huge part of how I lead in terms of my identity, even at work. And what was so illuminating is once I came out, I realized that so many of my other colleagues were gay. Like it wasn't spoken about. I mean, this is This is like 8 years ago. And now, I mean, all these badass women are the women in power. It just like blows my mind, like how many women who are gay are CMOs at these global brands. And once it's identified that you're gay, it feels like it's this sisterhood, and it's not required to do business together, but we help each other and we help elevate each other. And so that's been really remarkable. I'd say in the founder community, I mean, I'm so happy this is happening. And Ari's one of my best friends, but and we met because of work. I would say I don't know of that many gay founders. And when I meet one, I immediately want to bring them along for the ride, because I really feel like this is, you know, a brotherhood, a sisterhood, and we need to all elevate each other together.
Absolutely. I love that. Meg, I was curious about your experience.
To be honest, I was kind of surprised I got an invite for this panel. I came out like last year, and I was a little bit confused about the whole thing. But SoGal happens to be one of my investors, and like they knew I'd come out, and it wasn't so much like I've known I was queer since like, you know, early teenagehood, but I just wasn't sure like how loud I was supposed to be about it. And then like, yes, last year I like fell in love, you know, just like head over heels with this woman who I now live with, and it was just very clear. Like I then needed to decide like, what is this role in my identity? And I had a particularly interesting conversation with this business coach called Natalia Moguer. And she just asked me, she's like, you know, do you have a Black person in your organization? Do you have an LGBT person in your organization? I also have a disability. And for the disability and, you know, being LGBTQ, I was like, well, actually those things I am, but I wasn't public about either of them, because in the past, I just assumed that there were moments where I would have been discriminated against, right? Like on employment contracts, there's a question which asks you, do you have a disability? And so I was like, oh, okay, like that's the point, they're going to discriminate against me. So I had just never really talked about it. But then I realized that if I didn't stand up for it, then how do I pave that for anyone in my organization? And at that point, we were, you know, much smaller, and that meant that any other employee would have to come in and be the first like out person rather than me, and that didn't feel like the right sort of burden, and I need to be that person. And so here I am. Thank you for having me. I feel like I'm not experienced enough. My girlfriend and I were like actually strategizing. We're like, what if they ask me like a really hard question about being gay? Anyway.
Only hard questions about being gay from now on. This is the first brick. Well, thank you for being here. Yeah, welcome. We're so happy to have you. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. Aria, I'd love for you to go next. I'm also curious, like you kind of talked about you were in media before this, and like you made a lot of, you know, identity related content, like how kind of those like two different roles played into your queerness at all. If you have anything to say there, I'd be curious to hear.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that this panel is now all of our coming out stories. No.
Naturally.
Yeah, for me, I was actually talking to one of our collective members about this yesterday, because I think when you have gone through something that you like, there's this different piece of evolution inside of yourself. And so certain things that a lot of people take for granted feel like you feel the extra weight of them. And when they're missing from an organization you're part of or a conversation you're having, it feels like a sharper pang. And so when I was in media and now at ARFA, it's so important to be sharing all perspectives. And when I joined Vice in 2014, we were telling a lot of amazing stories, but it was a question of like, well, what's the female perspective on this? And, you know, and then we evolved with Broadly to be not just what's the female perspective on this, but what's the gender spectrum conversation here. You know, we did a partnership with Getty that actually created a new library of images of, you know, GNC and queer people, so that when you Google something, it's actually an accurate representation of what folks look like. And that happens across the board, right? Like Amani from Muslim Girl did that to have a broader range of Muslim women. And so being queer was an opportunity to, I think, force me to take a second glance, whereas otherwise I might not have. And always like wanting to push the conversation further. And it was always fun too, because I would travel to places around the world where, you know, being gay might have been illegal. And I showed up and people had to, you know, shake my hand and have conversations with me. And I think it forged a lot of unexpected friendships. And so it also, I never saw it as a mentorship or a leadership strength, but I think over time I've recognized that sharing that side of myself has allowed other people in organizations that I've worked with to feel more comfortable presenting their full self. And to me, that's always the most important thing. But I think every time, I mean, like, you know this, like you are at the front face of dealing with so many different perspectives on social, but there's always another story to tell. It's like you like think you're making a dent, and then you're like, no, actually the perspective for hundreds and hundreds of years has just been so clearly one tiny drop in the bucket. And that to me is the most fun challenge. And so shifting into direct to consumer, or, you know, into like the product space, it's like, well, brands have such a great opportunity to help lead people identity, but most of the institutional organizations are so outdated in the way that they approach their consumers that they don't actually have that relationship. And so why is that? You know, why do you expect to get dollars in your pocket if you're not actually recognizing who people are today? And so if you can start from scratch, there's so much benefit and joy in that. And that's really how I see it.
No, that's very real. Thank you for sharing that. I think we have time for one more question, and then we're gonna take some questions from the audience. Just a reminder to everyone watching, feel free to put in any last thoughts or questions. Yeah, I kind of want to end this with like, what makes you optimistic about the future right now? If anyone wants to start, open floor. And kind of what you want everyone watching to know about you right now, about what you're working on and what's important to you, before we dive into the questions. Rachel, you look eager to begin.
No, I mean, what I'm optimistic, I've always been optimistic about the generation that's coming up, like Gen Z, which I know, Willa, you specialize in, because they're just so woke. They see the world as so fluid. I mean, I wish I grew up at that time, because high school would have been a lot easier.
Yeah.
But now I think what's happening for baby boomers and boomers, like, they have to become woke, and they're getting called out on their bullshit, and they're being dethroned overnight. Like, it's actually wild to see what's happening at the C-suite level, within the startup ecosystem and also corporate America. And I believe that minority groups, which are actually the majority, are about to take force in a really remarkable and revolutionary way. So I remain optimistic about the future.
Yeah, I love that. Do you see that reflected in your audience, and, you know, in the people who are, you know, on the other end of your work?
I see it in my employee base. I see it from the sidelines with the, you know, brands within corporate America that I work with. And I think that's how you can create change. The government's not going to do it. The people are going to have to do it. And companies that have money can make really powerful changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephanie, I'm wondering, what makes you optimistic?
Yeah, well, despite the shortcomings of tech and, you know, what Mark Zuckerberg and many have done in the tech community, I still have the semi-utopian view that it can level the playing field for a lot of people who have been overlooked and marginalized for hundreds and thousands of years. I mean, the majority of the people under 18 soon will be on the continent of Africa, and there are yet to be discovered ways to tap into that intellectual capital. And so I think I'm optimistic about the ways in which this sort of fourth industrial revolution and the future of work will enable people to get in the game who've been historically sidelined.
Absolutely. Meg, do you want to?
Yeah, I think as people, we are all like storytellers, and that's one of the most important things that we do. I think as founders and as leaders, that's more important than ever in terms of spreading that information. And I think what gives me the most hope for the future is that now we have the ability to have harder and more vulnerable conversations than ever. And that can, just bring together so much more trust. It can help people create, it can help people collaborate. But I think that bodes a lot of really beautiful things for the future, because previously I think there were so many things that we were all scared about, that we were held down by, by various pieces of baggage. And now we can move past that and share our stories.
Absolutely. Ariel?
I echo all of that. I think just more work needs to be done to hand the mic over to other people. Like, the beauty of social is that everybody's weight can count. And if we can democratize algorithms and think more thoughtfully about the way that we highlight individuals today, it's such an exciting time to see change. 2020 is all about 2020 vision. So
I love that. Yeah, that one of the questions perfectly aligns with what you just said. I'd like to know about the different queer women you each look up to, or anyone whose journey you actively follow. If anyone has one top of mind, or just, even someone to follow on Instagram or Twitter that you think is truly thoughtfully, speaking up in a way that's productive and meaningful. And
I recommend Kimberly Drew.
Yeah.
She's an amazing activist and curator, and so thoughtfully uses her platform. Also, and she is a queer person. Joe Holder is not queer, but he does, GQ family. He does amazing work around health and wellness and democratizing that, which is so important.
Just did an amazing Instagram live with him today about mental health. It'll be on Instagram TV soon, but yeah, he is truly so amazing. So yeah, absolutely. And Kimberly. Is there anyone else? We can move on to, I think we have time for maybe two more. How can we support your businesses? If anyone wants to, anyone has any thoughtful to say about that? We're getting some links on that one.
Micmac is hiring like crazy. Just go to micmac.tv/careers. If your friends are looking for work or yourself, I'd love to meet them. So that's my call to action.
I love that. It could change your life.
Oh, sorry. We're announcing a product release on June 19th, Juneteenth, of this platform for Black executives. We're starting with corporate directors of public boards. There are actually only 275, I think, Black corporate directors. So in the off chance that any of you know one of these 275 people, would love a warm introduction.
Wow. Amazing. Another question from Shelby. Reflecting not on where you are now, but perhaps when you were employees or in more entry-level positions, how do you deal with closed-minded people in your organizations, and how do you affect change when you are in a position of leadership? Which I think is a really, really great question, and something that I'm seeing across social, but also just something always to think about, especially within these larger corporate systems.
I think it's harder in the realm of COVID, knowing how to do that remotely. In person, I would always say just weasel your way into the room. And even if that person thinks it's for a different reason, by the time that you're coming up with your idea and trying to put it into the world, you have, you'll be able to turn them. That was kind of my strategy in volunteering for everything. I think now it's really feeling comfortable, cold emailing, cold reaching out to get advice, and knowing that, in person, it really takes a great manager or leader to come up to you and say, hey, I think you have something you want to share with me. And that's even harder to read on Zoom. And so I would say take the vulnerability of reaching out to your manager or a peer to try and brainstorm on how you can share an idea or something you need help on. Or, if your organization has an anonymous hotline or something, because it's really hard otherwise if you don't have allies and if you don't feel comfortable speaking out. So what are tools you can use, and who's sort of your personal board that you can reach out to troubleshoot.
Yeah, I feel like something I've heard even just in the Zoom alone is the queer community is they do want to help you. And so just reaching out and continuing to remember that no matter where you are in this, in your professional journey. Has there been any advice that has truly like impacted the way you are professionally in terms of like speaking up about those things. And maybe we could end on that. If anyone has anything that has truly been helpful, especially, you know, being a queer founder, and, you know, being in these spaces that you do have to be vulnerable. So yeah.
No, it depends on the circumstance. So take this with a grain of salt. Stand up for yourself. Like my whole life, I've just never taken anyone's bullshit. And I think the stronger that you can be as an individual, the more it'll resonate on the other side. I know that's easier said than done. The second thing is if there isn't a safe space to have these conversations, work with your people ops department and encourage them to create this safe space, because sometimes folks just need to be invited into a room where they know this conversation can happen. And then the third is definitely build out your board of personal directors. I'd say that's gone further in my life than anything else. And like cross-generational friendships, I found to be so valuable. So if there's someone who has 10, 20 years in you, like that's an amazing relationship to try to strengthen, because there's so much wisdom to gain from folks who've been in the workforce longer.
I think also that, you know, being an instigator of change can be an incredibly valuable experience, and, you know, being the person who can kind of spearhead that in an organization. But it can also, you know, take a lot of effort, especially if you're more at the entry level position, and you need to decide whether that is a good use of your time, or whether like another place out there is going to be a better use of your talents, and recognizing that certain organizations can possibly be, you know, too archaic or have certain shortcomings that is difficult for people to oversee. But definitely what Ari and Rachel were saying, that your personal board of directors will survive with you throughout anything. But you need to decide when is the right time to kind of cut your losses.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I encourage everyone watching or who has stopped in at some point to like, please reach out to these 4 panelists. They are truly here to help you. And yeah, this is where I'll start. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to end it saying thank you to everyone involved, to all 4 of you for sharing your stories. It was just so wonderful to hear and inspiring in such a great way to, you know, be together, especially during Pride. So yeah, so thank you so much. And thank you again for being vulnerable and speaking and telling your stories. And your emails will be available if anyone else has any other questions. Feel free to email anyone. They're here to help.
Yes, echoing Willa, thank you panelists for spending this evening with us, and thank you Willa for moderating. Again, this is SoGal Foundation at I Am SoGal. On all platforms, we do a ton of events like this, so please stay tuned and please continue to join us. And Alex, if you have any final words before we head off.
Well, thank you. Thank you all the panelists, to Willa as well. Thank you, Kelly and SoGal. So StartOut is startout.org, and you can find more information there about our different chapters and what we have in terms of resources for LGBTQ entrepreneurs. Just because we're not meeting in person doesn't mean that we're slowing down. We have a ton of events. Sign up for our newsletter. You'll see a ton of weekly events during Pride, and they're on after.
Thank you all, and support these ladies' businesses. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Willa.